It was just before midnight in late August when the stillness of Malakote Road in Northport, Florida, was torn apart by a sound no quiet neighborhood ever expects to hear. A woman was screaming for help. Her voice cut through the darkness, urgent and desperate, as she ran from house to house, pounding on doors, pressing doorbells, crying out again and again, "I need help. I need help." For the people sleeping inside their homes, the sounds were confusing at first, half-formed nightmares breaking into reality. But by the time lights flicked on and residents tried to understand what was happening outside, the woman was already gone. Investigators would later piece together what those frantic moments meant. They would determine that the woman had escaped her home while being attacked, managed to make it down the street, and reached a neighbor's door before being forced back inside by the very person who was about to kill her. By the time police arrived, only traces remained, blood on the pavement smeared across a driveway, and a trail that told a story too horrific to imagine in a place like this. Help had come, but it had come too late. When officers arrived on Malakote Road that night, they were not prepared for what they were about to discover. Inside a nearby home lived two of the most well-liked and respected people in the neighborhood. What police found there was a scene of extreme violence, one that marked the beginning of a case so disturbing that it still feels unreal, even though every part of it is painfully true. Today's case is about a couple whose lives were defined by kindness, generosity, and faith. They opened their home and their hearts to someone they believed needed love and guidance. That decision, made with the best of intentions, ended in betrayal, brutality, and unimaginable loss. Northport is a growing city on Florida's Gulf Coast, known for its canals, natural springs, and proximity to sandy beaches. It's the kind of place people move to for peace, space, and a sense of community. Malakote Road sits within a developing neighborhood, quiet streets, newer homes, and only a handful of residents living there at the time. It was here, shortly before midnight on August 31st, 2023, that resident Jana Walton was sleeping upstairs in her home when she was jolted awake by noise at her front door. At first, it was the sound of the doorbell ringing. Then came loud banging, aggressive and urgent. Then she heard a woman's voice screaming. The words were clear and unmistakable. Someone outside was begging for help. Jana immediately woke her husband, checked on her children, and called 911. As she spoke to the dispatcher, she explained that she had been upstairs asleep while her daughter was downstairs when the noises began. Jana cautiously went to the door. When she opened it, no one was there. The street was dark and quiet, giving no immediate explanation for the chaos she had just heard. Still on the phone with emergency services, she stepped outside again. That was when she noticed something that made her heart sink. Blood. It was right there at her doorstep, smeared across the driveway and trailing away toward the street. When the dispatcher asked if she had seen the woman, Jana explained that they had only heard her voice. The neighborhood was mostly empty, with only a few homes occupied on that stretch of road. As Jana looked around, she saw more blood and realized the situation was far worse than she initially thought. Her voice grew urgent as she told the dispatcher they needed an ambulance immediately. She was instructed to lock the doors and remain inside. Jana and her family retreated to the safety of their garage as police vehicles began arriving, their flashing lights illuminating the darkness of Malakote Road. The quiet street transformed into a crime scene within minutes. Officer Tyler Regakus of the Northport Police Department was among the first to arrive. As he pulled onto the street, something immediately caught his attention. He saw a young man wearing a light, colored tank top and red shorts getting into a small black car. Even in the dim light, it was obvious something was wrong. The man appeared to be covered in blood. Officer Regakus identified himself and ordered the man to stop. Instead of complying, the man jumped into the car and sped away. What followed was a dangerous, high-speed pursuit through residential streets that eventually moved onto Interstate 75. Over the next 30 minutes, the suspect crossed county lines, drove at extreme speeds, and at one point even traveled against oncoming traffic. Multiple law enforcement agencies joined the chase. Officers remained on the correct side of the roadway as updates from the crime scene came in over the radio. What they were hearing made it clear this was no ordinary incident. 2 houses down from the Waltons' home, officers entered the residence where the fleeing suspect's car had been parked. Inside, they found a scene of unimaginable violence. Robbie and Jennifer Tower were dead. Their home was soaked in blood. Both had suffered dozens of stab wounds. The brutality of the attack was immediately evident. Missing from the house was the Tower's 22-year-old adopted son, Dimma Tower. Witnesses identified the fleeing vehicle as his black Chevy Sonic. The pursuit came to an end when Sarasota County deputies deployed a spike strip, flattening the car's tires. Dashcam footage captured what happened next. Dimma jumped out of the disabled vehicle and ran. He climbed a fence into an industrial area, bordered by canals known to be infested with alligators. Officers could hear the animals in the water, and believed Dimma entered the canals in an attempt to escape. Given the danger and darkness, the search was called off for the night. The next morning, the manhunt resumed. Robbie and Jennifer Tower had been married since October 21, 2000. They were deeply rooted in their faith and known throughout their community for their kindness and generosity. Jennifer had worked as a paralegal before becoming a realtor and business owner. She was deeply religious and devoted much of her time to teaching Sunday school. Robbie was known for his booming laugh and playful personality. He often wore silly socks or humorous shirts, bringing warmth and humor wherever he went. Both Robbie and Jennifer loved animals, especially their Rottweilers. They were the kind of people who welcomed others into their lives without hesitation. Robbie, in particular, was so well liked that neighbors jokingly referred to him as the mayor of Malachite Road. He organized block parties and gatherings to bring the community together, believing strongly in connection and fellowship. Their faith guided nearly every aspect of their lives. They frequently traveled on missionary trips to Eastern Europe and other regions, driven by a belief in service and compassion. When they realized they could not have children biologically, they turned to adoption. After visiting an orphanage in Ukraine, they committed themselves to the long, expensive, and emotionally exhausting process of adopting a child. That child was Dimma. Dimma was born in the Luhansk region of eastern Ukraine, an area now under Russian occupation. His early life was defined by trauma. His father was an alcoholic who abandoned the family. His mother died when Dimma was only 6 years old. After her death, he was shuffled between relatives before eventually entering the foster system. From there, he was placed in an orphanage that American visitors later described as prison-like, with reports of neglect and abuse. When Dimma arrived in Florida at the age of 14, Robbie and Jennifer embraced parenthood with enthusiasm and hope. Jennifer's joy was unmistakable. Robbie celebrated every milestone, every achievement, no matter how small. The Towers were determined to give Dimma the life they believed he deserved. But the transition was far from easy. Dimma spoke no English when he arrived. He struggled in school and had difficulty adapting to life in the United States. Despite his parents' support, he fell behind academically and eventually dropped out in the 10th grade. Still, the family continued to travel together, celebrate milestones, and share moments of pride. When Dimma became a U.S. citizen, the Towers proudly shared photos, marking what they believed was a new chapter in his life. Over time, however, tensions began to grow. Arguments became more frequent. Dimma moved out and then back in multiple times. In 2020, police were called to the home for a domestic incident, though no charges were filed. Family members later described the months leading up to August 2023 as increasingly volatile. By that time, Dimma had been living back at the house for about 8 months. He was working, and his parents had bought him the black Chevy Sonic, the same car he would later use to flee after killing them. The medical examiner's findings painted a grim picture. Robbie had suffered 68 stab wounds. Jennifer had suffered 79. Many of the wounds were to the neck. Blood evidence traced a path from the bedroom, through the house, out to the neighbor's door and back again. Investigators concluded that the attack was extraordinarily violent and deeply personal. On the morning of September 1st, a Shell gas station employee named Kay noticed a young man enter the store. He was muddy, disheveled, and immediately drew attention. He bought an iced tea. When Kay took his cash, she noticed mud mixed with red stains on his hands. She tried speaking to him in English and Spanish, but he didn't respond. Minutes later, police entered the store. Surveillance footage showed Dimma walking calmly outside before officers arrested him without incident. As investigators continued working through the early morning hours, Malachite Road remained sealed off. The flashing lights of patrol cars reflected off driveways and windows, illuminating a neighborhood that would never feel the same again. Residents stood at a distance, wrapped in blankets, whispering to one another in disbelief. This was not the kind of street where violent crime happened. It was a place where people waved from their driveways, shared food during holidays, and trusted one another enough to leave doors unlocked. That sense of safety had been permanently shattered. Inside the Towers' home, detectives moved carefully from room to room, documenting every detail. The sheer amount of blood made it immediately clear that the violence had been prolonged and relentless. This was not a sudden act followed by panic or regret. It was an attack that unfolded over time, leaving evidence of movement, struggle, and desperation. The trail that led from the bedroom through the house and out toward the street told its own silent story, one of fear, escape, and forced return. For investigators, one of the most disturbing aspects of the case was the knowledge that Jennifer had nearly escaped. She had made it outside. She had reached a neighbor's door. She had been heard. And yet, despite all of that, she was dragged back into the place she was trying so desperately to flee. That realization weighed heavily on everyone involved in the investigation. As news spread through Northport later that morning, shock quickly turned to grief. Friends, neighbors, and members of the tower's church struggled to process what had happened. Robbie and Jennifer were not just known, they were loved. They were the kind of people who remembered birthdays, checked in when someone was sick, and showed up when help was needed. To imagine their final moments was almost unbearable for those who had shared meals, prayers, and laughter with them. Law enforcement officials spoke carefully in their early statements, confirming the deaths and the arrest but withholding details out of respect for the victims and their families. Still, rumors spread quickly. The revelation that the suspect was their own adopted son left many people stunned. For those who had watched the towers pour years of love, time, and resources into Dimma's life, the betrayal felt incomprehensible. As the first responders began to secure the tower's home, a heavy silence fell over Malakote Road, broken only by the low hum of police radios and the occasional shouted command. Residents emerged cautiously from their homes, drawn by the flashing lights, the sound of sirens, and the undeniable feeling that something terrible had just occurred in their quiet neighborhood. Parents clutched their children tightly, unsure what had happened or whether they were safe. The streets were usually calm, a place where neighbors greeted one another and children played in the yards. Now it felt alien, dark, dangerous, and filled with the kind of fear that seeps into your bones. Officers moved methodically through the tower's home, documenting each detail, photographing each blood-stained surface, and marking evidence with meticulous care. The crime scene was overwhelming, not just for its brutality but for the depth of personal violation. There was no question that this was an intimate attack, one carried out by someone who knew the victims well. Every piece of evidence seemed to tell the same story. The attack was targeted, violent, and deliberate. Blood had been smeared across floors, walls, and furniture, tracing the paths of struggle and resistance. The investigators quickly realized that the attack had begun in the master bedroom, but the violence had not stayed confined there. It had spilled outward, spreading through the home, into spaces where love and life had previously flourished. Neighbors watched from a distance, whispering and trying to piece together the fragments of what they had heard. Some had been awakened by the screams themselves. Others were now piecing together the blood trail, leading from the tower's home to the Waltons' doorstep, a chilling reminder of the horror that had played out. Many residents later described feeling a profound sense of vulnerability, as if the attack had reached through their walls and touched their own sense of security. Malakote Road, once a symbol of suburban peace, had been transformed overnight into a scene of terror. Meanwhile, officers quickly shifted their focus to locating Dimma. The young man was now the primary suspect, and he had disappeared into the night. Information from the first responders was relayed to dispatchers, and multiple units were deployed across the city. Highway patrols set up checkpoints, police K-9 units were called in, and aerial support was requested to scan the surrounding areas. The pursuit had already begun when Officer Regikus spotted Dimma fleeing in his vehicle. Now, every possible law enforcement tool was being utilized to prevent him from escaping the county. During the chase, the danger extended beyond the immediate threat posed by the suspect. Residential streets, typically filled with parked cars and unsuspecting pedestrians, became treacherous corridors. Officers coordinated with precision, navigating narrow roads, school zones, and intersections while the suspect drove recklessly at high speeds. Every mile of the pursuit amplified the tension. The realization that this was a young man, likely familiar with the area, fleeing after committing a violent double murder, weighed heavily on those chasing him. At the same time, the community's response was a mix of fear, disbelief, and sorrow. Friends of the towers shared memories of block parties, Sunday gatherings, and the generosity that had defined Robbie and Jennifer's lives. Social media quickly filled with messages of mourning, many people expressing shock that such violence could occur within a family. Some neighbors recalled small acts of kindness, Jennifer delivering home baked goods, Robbie helping neighbors move furniture, the couple offering support to anyone in need. Those memories clashed violently with the reality of the murders, leaving residents grappling with the tension between who the towers were and what had happened to them. The night passed slowly for the officers searching for Dimma. Darkness limited visibility, and the suspect had fled into an industrial area bordered by canals. The alligator-infested waters created a natural barrier, and the risk of injury or worse complicated the pursuit. For hours, law enforcement combed the area, calling out his name, scanning for movement, and listening for any sounds that might indicate his location. By the time the search was suspended for the night, Dimma had vanished. Authorities had little more than footprints, tire tracks, and the knowledge that he was out there somewhere, potentially armed and dangerous. During those long hours, the psychological toll on first responders was palpable. Officers spoke later of the emotional weight of walking through the tower's home, seeing the victims' bodies, and retracing the steps of a violent attack perpetrated by someone who had been loved and cared for. The intimate nature of the crime, the fact that a son could commit such an act against the very people who had adopted him, made the scene profoundly disturbing. Many officers described a lingering unease, a realization that some tragedies defy understanding. Meanwhile, the forensic teams worked tirelessly to collect every piece of evidence. Blood samples were taken, fingerprints cataloged, and items handled with extreme care to avoid contamination. Each corner of the house was examined for traces of struggle, for clues about the suspect's movements, and for insights into what had transpired in the final, fatal minutes. Investigators noted the path from the bedroom to the street, the smears of blood at the doorstep, and the way the attack had involved both victims, suggesting confrontation, resistance, and deliberate cruelty. As the search extended into the early morning, law enforcement began to coordinate with neighboring counties and state authorities. Alerts were issued, and officers were stationed at key locations. Roadblocks, surveillance monitoring, and community alerts created a network designed to trap the suspect before he could cause further harm. Citizens were warned to stay indoors and report any suspicious activity. For the people of Northport, what had begun as a quiet night ended in fear and uncertainty. At the same time, family members of Robbie and Jennifer Tower were arriving, unaware at first of the full extent of the tragedy. The emotional strain on them was immediate. To be confronted with the murder of loved ones by someone who had been considered part of the family was almost impossible to process. The combination of grief, shock, and anger created a tense and painful atmosphere. Counselors and support personnel were called in to help family members navigate the first hours of understanding and mourning, even as investigators continued their urgent work. By the time Dimma was located at the gas station the next morning, the intensity of the situation had reached a fever pitch. Officers had been awake for hours, coordinating searches, analyzing surveillance, and preparing for the eventual capture. When the Shell station employee noticed the disheveled young man, law enforcement immediately responded. The arrest itself was quiet compared to the chaos of the previous night. Dimma was taken into custody without resistance, but the weight of what he had done hung in the air like a shadow. The arrest brought a brief sense of relief, but it also marked the beginning of another chapter of the legal battle that would follow. The need to untangle years of family dynamics, and the challenge of confronting the psychological and emotional aftermath. For the community, it was a time of mourning, reflection, and lingering disbelief. For law enforcement, it was a reminder of the unpredictable dangers they face and the resilience required to carry on when confronted with acts of unimaginable violence. In the days that followed, investigators continued to build their case methodically. Forensic evidence, surveillance footage, witness statements, and Dimma's own admissions painted a clear picture of what had occurred. The violence was not impulsive. It was deliberate. The decision had been made before the first knife was lifted. As the case moved toward prosecution, the focus shifted from the horror of the crime scene to the broader story of the family itself. Prosecutors worked to show the jury who Robbie and Jennifer Tower were, not just how they died, but how they lived. They emphasized the years of effort, patience, and sacrifice that went into adopting Dimma, supporting him through school, helping him gain citizenship, and continuing to welcome him back into their home despite ongoing conflict. In court, the contrast between the victims and the defendant was striking. Robbie and Jennifer were remembered through photographs, testimonies, and stories that highlighted their warmth and generosity. Dimma, by contrast, appeared distant and guarded. When he testified, his demeanor frustrated many observers. There was little visible emotion, little acknowledgement of the pain caused. His words often deflected responsibility rather than accepting it. The defense attempted to frame the killings as the result of intoxication and emotional overload, arguing that Dimma's traumatic past and impaired state prevented clear judgment. Prosecutors pushed back firmly, pointing to the steps taken before, during, and after the murders: drinking beforehand, choosing weapons, continuing the attack after interruptions, fleeing the scene. These actions, they argued, demonstrated awareness and intent. One of the most pivotal moments of the trial came when Dimma acknowledged that he had decided to kill his parents before entering the house. That admission undercut the defense's argument and reinforced the prosecution's case for premeditation. For the jury, it clarified what the evidence had already suggested: this was not a sudden loss of control. It was a choice. When the guilty verdicts were read, there was no celebration in the courtroom. Only quiet sobs, bowed heads, and the heavy understanding that justice, while necessary, could never undo what had been done. During the sentencing phase, loved ones spoke about Robbie and Jennifer not as victims but as people. They talked about faith, kindness, laughter, and generosity. They spoke about the hope the Towers had carried into adoption, and the devastation of seeing that hope end in violence. Robbie's father's request that Dimma no longer carry the family name underscored the depth of the betrayal. It was not said in anger, but in sorrow, a recognition that the bond they once believed in had been irrevocably broken. When given a chance to speak, Dimma did not offer the apology many were waiting for. Instead, he deflected blame, reinforcing the perception that he had never fully accepted responsibility for his actions. The judge's sentence, 2 consecutive life terms without parole, plus additional time for fleeing law enforcement, reflected the severity of the crime and the absence of mitigating factors. Malakote Road slowly returned to quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. The Towers' home stood as a painful reminder of what had been lost. For those who lived nearby, the memory of that night lingered. The screams, the flashing lights, the knowledge that evil had arrived not from outside the community, but from within a family. During questioning, Dimma admitted what he had done. Forensic evidence showed the attack began in the master bedroom. Robbie was asleep when Dimma stabbed him repeatedly. Dimma later described the number of stabs as countless. Robbie attempted to escape, bleeding throughout the house. Jennifer fled outside and made it to the Waltons' door. Investigators believe Dimma forced her back inside at knife point. Jennifer sat on the couch while Dimma spoke at length about his grievances. He talked about his anger, his resentment, and his belief that his parents were no longer his family. Then he killed her. When asked why he did it, Dimma struggled to explain. He said it was complicated, that others wouldn't understand. Eventually, he offered a single word: rage. He expressed hatred toward the United States and resentment toward his parents, claiming Robbie blamed him for ruining the marriage. Dimma admitted he had thought about killing them before entering the house. He drank whiskey, retrieved a knife from the kitchen, and went to the bedroom. After losing one knife, he washed another and continued the attack. Initially charged with second-degree murder, a grand jury later upgraded the charges to 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. At trial in November 2025, prosecutors emphasized planning and intent. Dimma testified in his own defense but appeared combative and frustrated. He showed little remorse. His defense argued intoxication and temporary insanity, framing the killings as crimes of passion. Under questioning, Dimma admitted he had decided to kill his parents before entering the house. The jury found him guilty on all counts. During sentencing, loved ones described Robbie and Jennifer's compassion, faith, and unwavering love for Dimma. Robbie's father asked that Dimma no longer carry the family name. When given the opportunity to apologize, Dimma instead blamed others. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 5 additional years for fleeing from police. Robbie and Jennifer Tower are remembered for their generosity, their missionary work, and their belief in helping others. Their love for Ukraine and its people led them to adoption, and ultimately to tragedy. That was the case of Robbie and Jennifer Tower. Thank you for being here.
Take care. I'll see you next time.